Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for signing up. I think it just goes to kind of show that a lot of the time we have what's maybe called imposter syndrome. We might reframe that today, but that you're not alone as well. So we've got the next just under an hour to take you through maybe some of the background of imposter syndrome as well, but give you an opportunity towards the end to start to reframe not only the term, but hopefully your thoughts. So thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. My name is Kirsty McWilliam, and I do have imposter syndrome. However, I would say I only have it some of the time, and actually I would never call it a syndrome, but we will come back to that today. So I think Sarah's introduced me enough. I work with individuals, teams, and wider organisations to develop the people, but also to help change the systems around them as well. So the phenomenon that is imposter syndrome, I actually struggle with that in saying it, and I'm going to have to say it a few times, so forgive me if I get it wrong at any point, but the phenomenon that is imposter syndrome. Not only that, but it's the explosion of this term into our everyday lives. It's everywhere that we go and we see. So I want to talk about it and maybe pull it apart a little bit and think about what it actually means for you and for the system that you work in today. So I'm going to just jump right in and start talking about imposter syndrome. So let me get a little slide up there as well. Brilliant. So this is imposter syndrome, the difference we would call between assumption and reality as well. So from working with thousands of coaching clients over the past 2 decades, I've come to understand that not all of our thoughts are based on reality. Are my clients, are we mad? Certainly we're not, but it's a tonality of our inner voice that can be. We all live in our heads, and sometimes it does lie to us. So here's the assumptions of what we think we know and what others know. For me, and this is my opinion, the real reality of imposter syndrome is that it's not a syndrome at all. There is nothing wrong with us, and there is nothing wrong with our thinking. The reality is these are normal thoughts of capable people. And if there's one thing I want you to leave with today, it's that saying, normal thoughts of capable people. And even by having a look around at how many are here and signed up, we know that you're not alone. Recent research has now shown that it can be up to 80%. 80% is huge. 80% of people that will have imposter thoughts. We know it's not gender specific. We know it's not race specific either. But we do know that it's more prevalent in professional roles like your own. Personally, I worry about the other 20%, and I do think perhaps somebody might have been inaugurated yesterday who is part of that as well, but we will leave that aside. But I want you to be curious about the 80% and curious about what is it about our systems that might actually exacerbate that as well. So we might have these thoughts, and I'm saying to them they're perfectly normal, but it's the effect of these thoughts. This is where it comes in terms of our performance. This is where it comes in terms of stealing the joy that we might have. So the effect of these thoughts are far-reaching. So they're normal thoughts, but they do help us to stay small. They stop us from speaking up. We might miss opportunities. We might not go for the promotion. Or if we do go for the promotion, we might be racked with doubt and anxiety. We might let others take credit for our work. And actually, as I've mentioned already, we might miss out on that joy. So there's a lovely quote that I always like to think about at this point when I'm thinking about imposter thoughts and the doubts and the effect that they can have on us, is that doubt kills more dreams than failure ever will. So we want to act, we want to do stuff because actually it's the failure that we can bear with, but it's not the doubt that kills the dreams. So I'm going to leave you to think about that. So this isn't a new thing, although it has exploded into our kind of world in the past few years, it has been around for quite a while. So let's just dip into a little bit of the research about where it comes from as well. So it started off with, as you can see, back in 1978, it started off with Ines and Clans, and they published a paper on it as well, and they started to call it the phenomenon as well. I knew I'd get it wrong, now I've said it, the phenomenon. And this also coincided in a time where actually we were having more females in the workplace, and those females were more senior as well. So there was a coincidence as well that they started talking about it here, but actually that they do talk to females only. And we'll come back to Valerie Young in a minute as well, but she also only speaks to females as well. The scale that we sent out in advance, the questionnaire about how big an imposter are you, that was from Dr. Clans here as well. And I hope it was enlightening. I'm interested to know if anyone felt their score was a surprise or if this was something that you already knew as well. I was running a workshop recently with a team, and it was a really unusual experience I had. They all started fighting over who was the biggest imposter. So I'll leave that with you and maybe the dynamics within that team as well. But as I said, it was Ines and Clans who started the conversation, but Valerie Young started, or was the first person to start to link it to the word capable, which really resonates with me as well. As I said, they both do focus on women, and certainly Valerie Young offers no apology for only focus on women as well, because although she knows, or she states that she knows it is prevalent in men, she thinks the reaction for the genders are different. And recent research states that we know that there's actually much more behavioural difference within a gender than between the two genders, or all genders, that the behaviours are different. So although we're talking in general terms, it will be different for each of us. So we've got to remember the individual when we're talking about imposter syndrome. But I do think they had some really interesting findings as well. So what Young found out, that for her female perspective, that what she found was that imposter thoughts or imposter syndrome would stop them from progressing or stop them from acting. Whereas the males that she had spoken to, and although it is rather generalised, whereas men would carry on regardless, but perhaps with very high anxiety or high doubt as well. So we can add in race, we can add in upbringing, different social, economic backgrounds as well. And we know that they all do play a part. One of the biggest ones as well, when we come out of that kind of intersectionality, is comparison. We know that comparison is also the thief of joy as well. So there is much more kind of research out there, but these are the two leading voices, and I would really encourage, especially Valerie Young's book. I find that really kind of influential in terms of the thinking that we've got today. So the biggest thing with imposter syndrome, and Valerie Young talks about the dirty secret of imposter syndrome, is that it doesn't go away. So these thoughts that we're having won't actually go away. Now, that can sound a little bit defeatist, but there are ways to combat it. And actually, there's ways to harness it so that actually we can use this to perform rather than use this to stop us going ahead. But one of the first parts of this is to talk about it. So the fact that you're here today, hopefully you'll keep the conversations going, but actually to speak about it and to start to normalise it within our teams and our organisations as well. So I am going to come to Sarah. So there's so many of us today, so the interaction is going to be between myself and Sarah. So I am interested, Sarah, if it's okay with you, I might just pop this slide up as well. We don't seem to be jumping in and out of slides, so I might just pop this up so people can see what we're talking about. How are you doing today, Sarah? If I was to ask you what your imposter sounds like, what would you say?
I think my imposter syndrome, my imposter tends to tell me that I'm not as good as everybody else thinks I am, or I put up a good game, but actually, if they knew how little you really knew, they would all be shocked and disappointed. I think that tends to be the wee voice in the back of my head. Maybe I'm not as good as people think I am at this. So I like being good at what I do. I like that as a value. And sometimes I don't believe it myself.
Yeah, I love actually how you've put that into one of your values, because I think we can link some of this more negative conversations we have with ourselves back to what we hold dear, which is our values as well. And I'm going to guess that there's quite a lot of people here going, oh my gosh, she's got the same imposter thoughts as I have. How did that happen? So they can be quite common, the thoughts, but it's very rare. You know, I've known you for a while, Sarah, and we've maybe touched on this, but it's very rare we have wider conversations around this as well. So have a think about, what does your imposter say to you as well? We're going to start thinking about actually what does it do when it starts to speak to you as well. So I said, thank you for that, Sarah. I said that I do have imposter syndrome, although I don't like the word, but that I only have it some of the time as well. So I want us to start thinking not only what it sounds like, but when does it appear? What are the times? And start to be a little bit more curious about that as well. We will come back to this. I'm going to share with you a quick story about some of my imposter thoughts. And actually, the thoughts that actually nearly tripped me up just before a speaking event. So I was invited to speak up at the university, at the medical school, up at the university, and I do a lot of work up at Edinburgh University. I love the environment. I really enjoy being part of it as well. So I was quite excited to get invited to speak to them as well. So I arrive, it's an in-person event, which is exciting as well. I can see a couple of people I know. I get myself a little cup of tea and I've got a new suit on, so I'm feeling quite happy with myself. And I walk into the packed room and there's a lovely buzz, there's an excitement in the air as well. And it was so lovely. It was all women. There was women there with their children, breastfeeding. It was just such a beautiful, inclusive space. And I was really excited to start speaking as well. So I walk in, and on the left-hand side, they've got a massive screen. It probably wasn't that big, but it felt massive to me, of all the speakers and all their names and what they were going to talk about as well. And I just felt it. It was like I was stopped and I looked and it was Professor this, Professor that, Professor Kirsty, Professor. And right away that thought came in. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I could spell a PhD, never mind have one. Oh my God, why did they ask me? Oh my gosh, I'm in this room of really, really smart, clever people. And I could feel myself, when you feel yourself starting to unravel, I actually had the really shameful thought of thinking, well, it's digital. If I could just find the person, I could maybe go and put some of my own letters. I've got letters after my name. I'm going to find the person and get them to put my letters after my name. Thankfully, I didn't do that. But what did I do? And it's about in those moments making a difference. So the first thing is identifying it. Yeah. The first one is thinking, right, okay, what am I going to do? I'm walking towards the speaker's table. They all look really lovely. So it's not that. And I have to think, okay, this is important to me. This is why I'm reacting like this. I want to make a difference. I want to share quite a lot of what I've got with the people in here. So I identify it and I acknowledge it. That's what's happening. The second part, and we are going to go through this, the second part is to normalize it. Do you know what, Kirsty? It's okay, you're not an academic. In fact, I think the very reason you're here is because you're not and they wanted a different voice. Okay. And then the third part is to act. So we need to take that awareness and that normalization to do something, and it can be really small. Yeah, we're not doing massive things here, but we want to carry on. We want to carry on and get back in the zone. So I walked to the table, put my shoulders back, I smiled. A smile really helps for me. It always kind of takes away some of those nerves anyway. And I say hello. So I actually started my talk that day because I thought, you know, I have to share this. I can't get up and talk about imposter syndrome and not tell them what's just happened when I walked in. So I got a little laugh. I said, if you want to know what an imposter looks like, just have a quick look at the speaker list there. And it settled me into my talk and we carried on as well. So it's just to kind of help you think about how do we do these, or how do we do this in the moment? We identify it, we recognize it, we normalize it. This is okay. And then we do something. And hopefully, whether it's gender or race or whatever we're looking at, these 3 steps can work for all of us as well. And for me, the key thing is to have them quite simple so that I do actually remember it as well. So let's look a little bit wider as well. So there's a little bit about how an imposter sounds, where it came from in terms of the research. But I'm quite interested to know, she says as she's having a look at her slides, where they are. I'm quite interested to know where your imposter came from as well. So before we do that, sorry, this is a slightly different slide deck. There we go. So I've not got my animations working. So I've got 3 people up here on the screen just now, all very different, all from very different walks of life. I hope we can agree all very capable and successful in their own rights, but also publicly lauded. You know, they've had so much external validation, but let's just have a look at what their inner voice says here as well. And again, these are the 3 people that resonated with me. There's many, many more as well. I like to smile when I think of Albert Einstein as an involuntary swindler as well. Not a term I think any of us have said about him as well. when I think about imposter syndrome and when I think about the effect that it can have on the people I work with, on the people that I love, I do come back to thinking if I had one wish, if I had one wish that you could take away or that could change, it would be that you, that people I work with could see themselves as other people do. If these three people could see themselves truly through someone else's eye, then their self-regard, our self-regard, and self-regard is how we accept ourselves, warts and all, and it's the foundation of our emotional intelligence. It's so important, our self-regard. Then actually, not only would we be happier, we would perform better. But actually, I do believe that the world, and it sounds quite big, being quite bold, but I do believe that the world would be a better place. So it's that, how do we see ourselves as others? And I think Sarah mentioned it earlier when we were chatting as well, is actually, can we shine that light back on somebody else as well? So I'll leave you with that as well. If you actually just have a look at imposter syndrome in famous people, there's just loads of them as well. So it's certainly not just these three as well. Brilliant. Okay, just before I carry on, is there anything in the chat that I should come back to? Or are we all right just now? We
So
good?
there was a comment just there, Kirsty. Somebody shared that they felt their imposter syndrome got worse since getting their PhD, and there is something about the more achievement, sometimes the more doubt that we carry. So thank you for sharing that, the individual in the chat there. And on our Friday email 2 weeks ago, we mentioned a bit of this in our building your self-confidence as part of leadership confidence. And Maya Angelou was one of the examples provided there. And of course, you would never think that hearing her speak and perform and talk, but it's something that does really go across all backgrounds, levels, stages, genders, roles, and success levels as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? And I've coached lots of people who do have a PhD as well, and I'm in awe of them. And it's how we shine that back, isn't it? Okay, so I'm going to give you a moment just to think back, and have a look back and think about the context of perhaps where those imposter thoughts first started. It might be our upbringing. It might be in terms of, for example, I've got a really bright sister, like really bright. She's really bright. And even the best intentioned parents, and actually perhaps us as parents, if we're parents as well, we can exacerbate this, but with no intent at all. So it's maybe the small things that we hear growing up. Paul's the sporty one. What about Paul's siblings? Are they not sporty? And then we come to school and university and we get many stories about people being the big fish where they're in school, and then they get to university and actually, gosh, they're not the brightest in the class. And how do they deal with that and what happens? And it's how we respond to it as well. Again, more prevalent for today is workplaces. It's a huge part. We've talked about the system. We know an awful lot about psychological safety now. We didn't before, but actually, do we practice it as well? And then friendships, sports, hobbies, is it too competitive in your friendships? Are you trying to keep up? Sarah, I'm interested, just to know, I'll keep coming to you. Any of these resonate for you? Can you think back to when it started or any kind of connection?
I think the key thing for me was I was really bright at primary school. Yeah. And up until about standard grade level, so I was at school in the 80s, standard grade level kind of did really well, and then hit hires and it all fell apart. And then got to university and felt like everybody else was doing really well and I just wasn't coping, and then suddenly felt that maybe I'm not as smart as everybody said or I thought I was. I mean, I got my degree, I got a good degree and all the rest of it, but still kind of sense that, but there's others who are smarter than me, so therefore I can't be that smart. So it was kind of been built up all that time until about 15, 16, being you were one of the smart ones, you were one of the bright ones, come to you for an answer in class, and then all of a sudden you're like, please don't ask me anything in class or in any of those groups. So it's kind of, that was a definite turning point for me.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, because actually, we're going back, and my son just doing hires at the moment as well, and realizing how pivotal it can be about, what happens when we maybe come against failure for the first time, and how we respond to that as well. Okay, so I suppose it doesn't really matter, certainly kind of in terms of what we do about it, where it came from. It's just starting to understand yourself a little bit better and contextualize it. It just is. Wherever it came from, best intentions, schools, managers, whatever it is, it just is as well. And it's interesting in terms of thinking about the NHS and thinking about the wider healthcare system as well. Do the systems that we all operate in exacerbate it as well? You know, I feel really lucky. I get to work with Nest quite a lot, actually. I work on their executive coaching framework. I work with a lot of the GPs. I work up at the medical school as well. And, you know, going back to the person with a PhD, you know, going back to certainly the people I work with as well, being surrounded by high achievers, being surrounded by all this knowledge can actually exacerbate it as well. There was a study down in England, one of the NHS trusts as well, and they looked at nurses, but nurses within specialist roles. And actually, the self-doubt came from the role expectations being so high, but then the fear of their exposure, and all of these led to burnout as well. The BMA have also done some reports about imposter syndrome, whether you've seen it or not as well, and they've found that it's all levels. Yeah, it's not just kind of, oh my gosh, you know, once I get my PhD or once I get consultant or whatever it is, it's prevalent in all levels, but actually they have found that there is a higher prevalence with ethnic minority backgrounds as well. And again, it does lead to burnout as well. Science and pharmaceuticals, 78% of the study BMA did reported higher levels of imposter thoughts as well. So it's interesting to know where it comes from, but we're not going to dwell on that. It just is. And it's understanding yourself and then making that decision, like, what am I going to do now? Now I know about that. You know, now I know, yeah, I do have the smart sister. Do you know what? The hires were the ones that maybe tripped me up. Right, it's the picking yourself back up and moving on from it. So before we do that, we are going to have a quick look at imposter types. So we've got a little bit of a poll coming up as well. So whether you knew it or not, there are actually different types of imposters out there as well. And there's 5 different types that I thought might be quite interesting. So hopefully you can see that as well. But we are going to hopefully launch a poll as I'm talking. I'm going to read them out a little bit so that you can complete the poll as well. And Sarah, I might ask you what one you are as well. So in terms of the first one, so we've got perfectionist up there as well. They have really high standards. You know, it has to be done and it has to be finished. We might have been talking about this earlier, Sarah, and it has to be done to the highest standard as well. Again, just to say about the imposter types, you might not just have one, but there tends to be one that's louder. The expert, they're knowledge hogs. Yeah, how much do I know? I want to know everything. And if I don't know everything, then actually what's the implications of that? Come down to the soloists. They like to be on their own. They like to do things. They can be quite brisk. I can do it, but they might shut others down as well. And then we come to the natural genius. And they do expect that they should pick things up really quickly. And if they don't, they might very quickly give up as well. And then we come to the superhero, that I will do it. I can't say no. Keep piling it on. Keep piling it on. So pop in the chat which one you think, and we can have a little bit of a chat about it. Right now we know about it. What can we do about it as well? Okay, so I've got some points to remember, and again, we will kind of send this out to you as well. So depending on which one you maybe identified with most, they're just little notes to help you maybe want to move from that type of imposter, not to another imposter, just move from the imposter altogether as well. The ones that jump out to me there is your perfectionism impacts other people. Gosh, that's quite hard to hear, isn't it? Expert, there really is no end to knowledge. Subtext, it's okay not to know. As I'm saying these, how are they landing when it's just not okay not to know? The natural genius, actually, people, you know, seek out people smarter than themselves. There's so much Steve Jobs talks about, you know, always hire someone smarter than yourself. And that's so important for us to do. And Superwoman, which is my one, or superhero, it sends unhealthy messages to our kids. Oh, it's a little bit hard to hear as well. So depending on which ones you are noticing is maybe more prevalent in you, it's about thinking, do you want to continue with this? Is it serving you or is it not as well? So it gets a feel on not only who you are, but the impact it has on you, on your performance, but also on those around you. Our thoughts do matter. We know that our thoughts become our feelings and eventually become our actions as well. So I'm going to leave you with that. We're going to move on now to the part that I said to you about, right, let's do something about it. So I'm going to walk through the 3 steps with you as well, looking at timing up. Okay. Move on to the 3 steps. We've made them super simple because that's the only way I will remember them as well. So the first part is identify, recognize the moments where these thoughts creep in. Yeah, recognize the patterns and triggers. We're going to look at them all a little bit more in depth as well. The part and the reason for identification is you can't address what you don't notice. And I think quite a lot of the time we have our head in the sand. Sometimes the imposter thoughts, it can keep us quite comfortable. So we don't want to move past them as well, but we can address what we don't notice as well. So the awareness really is the first step as well. Normalization, we should actually maybe count how many times I say normal or normalization on this talk as well, but it's a really key part. So it's not just good enough to understand it and have awareness of it, but we need to normalize it to give ourselves a bit of a break. It's not just us as well, it's common and it doesn't affect, or it doesn't reflect, sorry, our reality. But then the third part is act. We need to take steps. We need to take steps either to frame our thinking or to do something different, but with that compassion as well. So let's break down identity a little bit more as well.
Kirsty, may I interrupt just a moment?
You may.
We have a question that might be helpful at this point as well. So
yeah.
There's a question about being curious about superwoman, and is it meant to be gender specific or a typo? And I'm just wondering if this model has come from the original founders who focused mainly on women.
It was.
Is that where this comes from, or?
Yeah, so I think on one of the slides we've changed it to superhero, because we've tried to kind of take out the gender as well. But yeah, Valerie Young's book talks a lot about superwoman as well. And I think actually a slide we have actually had a picture of superwoman lying on the floor exhausted. But it was, and there's some really nice interviews done with Valerie Young where she actually stands on her ground about just talking about women as well. But yeah, that's where it came from.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's look a little bit more in terms of identification about how we can be curious and how we can reframe it as well. So I would like you to think about a time that you had an imposter thought as well. And sometimes when we're going through to try and help you with reflective questions, it can be good to choose something that maybe was quite a big imposter thought, maybe really stopped you doing something, or maybe took that joy out of it as well. So we're going to just start in the moment of being curious. And we're holding that curiosity with no judgment. This isn't about us saying, well, you shouldn't have listened to those thoughts or you shouldn't have let those thoughts stop you. We're just being curious. This is the why. So it's the root cause. Was there beliefs? Was there fears? Is it fear of failure? Was it perfectionism? Was it high expectations? But why did this thought come? It might be external. But then there's the what. Actually, do you know what? The other why, it could be feedback that someone was talking about as well, or comparison to others. Actually, for me, the fear of not being the expert, if we think back to my example as well. But yeah, feedback could come into the why. We've had feedback in the past and it's still there. What is the situations? Maybe it's when you're in a new role. Maybe it's only around promotions. Maybe it's around extra responsibility. Maybe it's around public speaking. But we're trying to find trends and patterns so that you can start to identify it, so that you'll know if any of these are coming up. You'll be prepared for it as well. Could be when you're around high achieving peers in the medical school. And then where? So actually, what's the context for this as well? Is it your professional life? Is it your home life? Going back to the question, the chat we had earlier as well. Is it in educational settings? Is it societal? Is it only in networking events as well? And even if you can't think about it in terms of this example, but where do you feel most vulnerable? Where do you feel this kind of inner critic is really coming into play as well? And then the last one, it could be who. It could well be that there are people, it's maybe authority figures. I used to, when I first started as an accountant, I used to have to take bundle of papers up to the partner every day and get him to sign it. And he was on the top floor of a townhouse. I could never breathe by the time I got there. And it wasn't because I wasn't fit enough. He just absolutely terrified me as well. So it was loud there as well. I mean, all you had to do was sign papers. I don't know. I used to get myself in a bit of a mess about it. So is it authority figures? Is it an age thing? Is it patients? Is it certain patients? Is it peers? Or that social network as well? And we're just try with this slide under the identification is help you to start to identify where it might happen. Who is it? What are the patterns, or maybe what are the themes, so that you can start to hopefully navigate them as well. So the second part to identification is starting to reframe it. We talk a lot about reframing our responses as well. So I want to build on the example hopefully you've got in your head, and be curious as well. So again, it could be at work or in life, but when I'm in a situation where, so I'll give you my example from earlier as well. So when I'm in a situation where I walk into a room full of very clever people and I see that I'm the only one without the PhD, I usually feel anxious and nervous. The negative voice in my head says, oh my gosh, you're definitely going to say or probably do something stupid, and they're going to start questioning why they've even asked you here. And what I typically do is overtalk. When I sat down at that table, I was like jabbering nonsense. But actually the bigger things, what I typically do is play down my own achievements. So we're starting to think about our responses and how we respond in the moment. And now we do want to reframe it as well. And this is kind of sitting in the pain a little bit. But what's going to happen if you never change this pattern? What price will you pay? But what opportunities will you miss as well? So for me, the impact is I won't be taken seriously. And actually, I'm not going to get my voice and my opinions to be heard. And actually, the big opportunity for me as a kind of independent consultant is I might not get the follow-on work. But what is it for you? Because if we can work out what it is, that kind of pain, the price or the opportunities missed, then actually this will really help us in terms of spur us into action to change how we actually respond as well. You work really hard. You know, it's an honour to be part of the programmes that I do and see the amount of work that we all put in here, or you guys all put in here as well. You deserve it. You deserve to be heard. So what's the price you might pay and the opportunities you might miss if you continue with this? So I'm going to whiz on because I can see we've not got too much longer left as well. Let's move on to normalisation. Again, that's another tick for me saying it as well, but it is the normalisation slide. So it's really just understanding this is common. I think we know that by now, and also it doesn't reflect our reality. Many, many, many successful people talk about this across industries, and it's similar feelings as well. We want to reduce the stigma of imposter syndrome. In fact, I'd love to stop calling it imposter syndrome. Imposter thoughts, normal thoughts of capable people as well. I just want to touch on the inner critic, the inner coach, that little inner voice in our head. I worked with someone once and he was lovely, but he had very low emotional self-awareness, and that's what we were working on. And I asked him about the tonality of his inner voice, and he said, oh my gosh, do you have an inner voice too? I was like, yeah, we can all do. But it's the tonality that really matters as well. The inner critic, the inner coach, they both have a role. This isn't about minimizing your critic. Your critic can keep you safe. It can give you warning signs. And your coach is there to encourage you, to stretch you. Quite a lot of the time with the imposter thoughts, it shows that we're trying to grow. We're moving out of that comfort zone as well, and care for us. The tonality will be different for each of us. So have a think about, what is the tonality of your inner voice? Is it balanced? Is your coach maybe the more dominant one? Or is your critic the more dominant one? And the exciting news for us in kind of personal development spaces as coaches, it's actually you can change this with awareness, with development, with focus. You can turn up or turn down whichever one needs the adjustment as well. I don't think I mentioned earlier, but one of my clients called her inner critic Debbie Doubter. And I think naming it can all of a sudden just bring it out. You know, they're part of us and we want them to work with us as well. So she would say, like, here she comes again, Debbie Doubter. What is it that she's doing as well? So sometimes it can be really useful. Really nice book, got very popular, is The Chimp Paradox. It can really help with this. So if that's something, I would encourage you to look at that as well. Just a moment on Luck, timing, connections. These are just the stories we tell ourselves. Well, actually, I only got that promotion because, I was lucky that no one else went for it. It was the timing, actually, it's because I knew people. But actually, with luck, well, maybe it's the people that put themselves out there. Maybe it's the lifelong learners who are constantly curious that draw the luck to them. Timings, yeah, it could well have played a factor, but it could never be the whole reason. And connections, absolutely. It might have been partly because of connections, but how did you build those connections? There's value that you did that, but also whether you were gifted the connection. It's very rare for someone to put their reputation on the line for you unless they believe in you or the person that they believe in believes in you as well. So just start to be much more aware of the story that you're telling yourself. What are you saying about luck, timing, and connection as well? So we're going to pop on to the act part as well. But just before we do that, Sarah, anything from the chat before I kind of whiz myself through as well?
There is a bit of a conversation, a lot of appreciation for inner critic and inner coach, the balance of both, and also just some noting that the use of the word inner critic rather than imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon, taken away from kind of pathologizing, I think is that the right word, or kind of making this a diagnosable thing as such, kind of stepping back to something that's maybe more manageable ourselves.
Yeah, and something we can use. How can you use imposter syndrome? All of a sudden we're in a space that we think there's something wrong with us, but we can use our inner critic because it's ours. Yeah, we can use it, we can influence it, or we can ignore it if it's not behaving itself. So let's move on to act then, the very final part as well. We can't keep this all in our head. It's about how we now take it out there. We know kind of our internal dialogue sometimes is not the most reliable as well. So it's about how we take steps to challenge maybe our thinking, the thoughts, or what's going on around us as well. Action is key. We love a bit of action in coaching because it disrupts maybe the cycle of overthinking and it can reinforce some of the positive beliefs. I could walk over to that table, I could sit down, I could say hello. It reinforces positive beliefs about our own abilities as well. So I've got some reflective questions for you. And I want us now to start pulling it back from the response and reframing earlier on and to kind of finish here with thinking about, right, okay, I now understand, I've got an example, there's maybe patterns, and it's starting to give yourself a new narrative of how you want to act in the future and give yourself a break on this. You're not going to kind of, first time an imposter thought comes up, you're not going to be able to identify, normalize, and act right away, but you'll be chipping away at it. I think actually I've seen chipping away in the comments here, chipping away at it and starting to change those pathways as well. So what self-affirming things would I rather feel in those moments? So with my example, I want to feel excited, but I want that to be a good energy. I don't want it to be a nervous energy. So I want to harness that feeling of being excited that I was invited to that room. What would I like my new positive voice to say? I would like it to say, Kirsty, you've had this feeling before. This is not new. And it turned out well. It turned out fine last time. You've had this before and you've got it. And what would I rather do? I want to go and have fun. I love having a little bit of a laugh and having a little bit of fun at work as well. And actually, if I'd stayed in my head, I wouldn't have had that. So I would rather sit down, smile, and get on with it as well. So it depends what's coming up for you there as well. And there'll be lots of different ones for lots of different ones. Sometimes the new positive voice can say, I am capable. I'm just here to learn. Maybe the perfectionist one. It doesn't have to be perfect. Perfect. I don't think I said that properly. A great one for perfectionists, and I use this a lot, is this is just now. Just now. We'll get there in the end, but just now. Mistakes are okay. They're part of learning as well. So Sarah, just before we kind of maybe open up to chat, and I've got some tips, etc. for everyone as well. Any thoughts from you at this point?
I think it's just really interesting to see, we've got quite an active chat function going on today. It's interesting to see the support and care that people are sharing and showing for each other, which is fantastic. And kind of sharing what they do, what they feel. And what's really resonated with me is a few people have shared they been really worried that if I put something in the chat, I'll end up saying something silly. And as facilitators, we get so concerned that there's nothing happening in the chat and people aren't feeling safe enough to
Yeah.
come and say things. So it's really helpful to understand that
Yeah.
that's kind of there. So we've got a couple of shared resources on this topic that we've shared from Leading to Change before, so we can put these round along with the follow-up email to everyone that comes
Yeah.
that's come along today. There'll be the recording, there'll be the slides, and there'll be some follow-up support as well. So there will be more to be able to do.
So in terms of actions, we've put some strategies up there as well, whether actually you're going, my goodness, I really need to maybe think about my self-awareness a little bit here. Maybe it's that negative self-talk, what's going on? Maybe you do have quite a lot of negative thoughts that you want to challenge. Maybe we want to dial that inner coach up, even 10%. How can we be more compassionate? Maybe we've got goals that aren't realistic. Maybe they're other people's goals. Maybe they're not ours. And actually, one of the things, and I do think it's maybe a Scottish thing, I'm not sure if you agree, Sarah, but we're not very good at celebrating our own achievements. Don't get too big for your boots over there, whatever you do. And actually, are you good at that positive affirmation and visualization as well? But I want you to write something down. I want you to pick something you've heard, whether you put it in the chat, whether you keep this for yourself as well. We would love to hear it in the chat if you want to put it in there as well. But what can you do? Maybe it's seek feedback. I know we've talked about maybe that was a bit harsh. But write something down. And we want to aim for progress, not perfection. I said that earlier on, this isn't about getting it right first time you try to do any reframing about your imposter thoughts. It's about reminding yourself these are normal thoughts of capable people, and it's about progress, not perfection as well. So hopefully you write something down. You're 3 times more likely to actually do it if you write it down as well. So please do, if you can find a bit of pen and paper, write it down hand. If not, pop it onto your electronic notepads or whatever you do as well, or share it in the chat. That would be really lovely. Also, if there's something you want to do as a kind of key learn to take away from today, please do share that in the chat. Also, for those of you who maybe haven't done the imposter syndrome one, because we've obviously got your details if you do, if you would like to kind of keep in touch with us, we've got some follow-on materials that we can send out as well. There's a QR code to scan and do it. But I think before we kind of get to any final Q&A, just want to think about your key takeaways for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been a nice way to have your lunch as well. I hope that we come out of this and maybe stop using the word syndrome as well. It's normal thoughts of capable people. And while we can't banish them for good, I do think Valerie Young is right that we're not going to get rid of them altogether. We can turn them around. We can start using them. We can start using them as information, turn that data into information, what's going on, and be curious. And hopefully that information can help you rather than hinder you as well.